Vienna, May 7th, 1824. A 53-year-old man stands on the podium. He is facing an orchestra twice the normal size. He's wearing a dark green coat, but it looks wrong, shabby, ill-fitting. His gray hair is wild, standing up in tufts. His arms are moving through the air. He punches the empty space. He crouches down low, almost to the floor, and then leaps up, arms spread wide. He's marking time. He's marking the shape of something massive. But the orchestra isn't watching him. Before the concert, the stage manager pulled the musicians aside. He gave them a strict instruction: do not look at Beethoven. For the past hour, the musicians have followed the assistant conductor, Michael Umlauf, who is standing quietly to the side, keeping the actual beat. Beethoven is flailing at a tempo that only exists in his mind. He is conducting a symphony he cannot hear. Now, the final movement. A chorus of voices rises, singing words by Friedrich Schiller. And it builds, it layers, it gets louder and louder until the floorboards of the theater are vibrating. The theater erupts. People are standing on their chairs, they're waving their handkerchiefs, they're throwing their hats into the air. And the man on the podium, he's still conducting. He is still waving his arms at the silent instruments. He is several bars behind where the music ended. In his world, the music is still playing. A young alto singer named Caroline Unger stands up. She walks across and she gently turns him around. Beethoven sees the crowd for the first time. He sees the open mouths, the clapping hands, the tears on faces, 5 standing ovations, and hears nothing. This is the image we hold of Beethoven, a triumphant genius, a man who conquered deafness with pure will. But that is a comfortable lie. If you look closer at that night in 1824, you don't see a man who's won. You see a man who is socially isolated, physically failing, and hanging onto his sanity by a thread. Beethoven's story is a case study in the unseen costs of greatness. It's a story about a man who treated his life like a problem he couldn't solve, so he tried to force it. It's about the danger of applying grit to things that can't be conquered, like other people, or your own biology. This isn't a story about talent. I'm Christiane, and this is the Gut Podcast. Act 1, The Forge. To understand the man, you have to understand the market. Bonn, Germany, 1778. If you were a commoner in 18th century Europe, you didn't have a career path. You had a station. If you were born a baker, you died a baker. If you were born a peasant, you died a peasant. Music was one of the few escape hatches of the times. It was the professional sports of its day. If a child was a prodigy, they could get hired by a court, secure a pension, and lift an entire family out of poverty. The competition was ferocious. Every father with a piano was looking for the golden ticket. Beethoven's father, Johann, knew this better than anyone. He was a court tenor in the Elector's Chapel, a man with a mediocre voice and a serious drinking problem. He had watched Leopold Mozart tour his son Wolfgang around Europe, making a fortune. Johann looked at his own son Ludwig, and he didn't see a child. He saw an asset. So he instituted a regimen of brutality. Imagine this. It's 2 a.m. The house is freezing. The door slams open. Johann stumbles in from the tavern with drunk friends smelling like stale wine. He goes to the bed where 7-year-old Ludwig is sleeping. He drags the boy out and puts him at the keyboard and says, "Play." So the boy plays. His eyes are stinging with sleep. He plays scales. He plays improvisations. Father's friends are standing there, judging. When the practice sessions didn't go well, Johann had a favorite punishment. He would lock Ludwig in the cellar, a damp, dark hole under the house. No light, no sound. Just the boy and the silence. Beethoven learned 2 things in that cellar that would define the rest of his life. First, perfection is the only way to stay safe. Second, you're on your own. No one is coming to save you. By the time he leaves for Vienna in 1792, at age 21, he arrives in the capital of music and enters the Shark Tank. Vienna was filled with pianists, virtuosos who could play faster, lighter, more elegantly than anyone else. Beethoven couldn't out-pretty them, so he decided to outwork them. He didn't play like a gentleman. He played like a blacksmith. One contemporary described his style as tremendously violent. He attacked the instrument. He was rough, unpolished, and terrifyingly intense. We have this romantic idea of the composer staring out the window, waiting for the muse. But Beethoven was grinding. He realized early on that the old system, where you wore a uniform and served a duke, was dead. He refused to be a servant. He was one of the first musicians in history to demand independence. He negotiated his own fees. He haggled over the price of his sheet music. He organized his own concerts, hired the venues, printed the tickets, and counted the receipts himself. He was gaining recognition and soon one of the best and most recognized pianists in Vienna. He had engineered his own freedom in a time of classism. Yet his attitudes toward these patrons wasn't gratitude. Years earlier, his patron Prince Lichnowsky asked him to perform for some French officers. Beethoven refused. The conflict escalated. He wrote a note to the prince that became legendary. It is the ultimate statement of a self-made man. "Prince, what you are by accident of birth. What I am through myself. There have been and will be thousands of princes. There is only one Beethoven." In those times, statements like that could get you killed. But he was winning. He was the undisputed musical king of Vienna. But there was a problem. A ringing. A buzzing in the left ear. At first, he ignored it. He thought it was stress. He thought it was a cold. But it didn't go away. In fact, it moved to his right ear. High frequencies started to disappear. The voices of women, children, and high wind instruments became a murmur. Think about the psychological weight of this. His entire identity, his income, his growing fame, his worth as a human being was tied to his ears, and they were failing. He wasn't just afraid of failing, he was also afraid of being exposed as a fraud. How can you be the greatest musician in Vienna if you can't hear the flute? He kept it a secret for 6 years. He would sit closer to the orchestra. He would memorize the way lips moved so he could guess what people were saying. Eventually, he stopped going to social gatherings, not because he didn't want to go, but because he was terrified that someone would speak to him and he wouldn't answer. He wrote to a friend, "I have avoided all company because I find it impossible to say to people, 'I am deaf.'" The potential shame was worse than the silence of isolation. In 1802, on the advice of his doctor, he retreated to the village of Heiligenstadt, a quiet place. Maybe the country air would help your ears. One afternoon, when he was walking with his student, the student stopped. He pointed to a shepherd playing a pipe in the distance. "Listen," he said. "How beautiful." Beethoven looked at him. He strained. He focused every ounce of his will, but he heard nothing. For the student, it was a passing moment. For Beethoven, it was the end of the world. It was a confirmation that the glitch in his ears was permanent. He went back to his room and wrote a document. Historians call it the Heiligenstadt Testament. It was addressed to his brothers, though he never sent it. It reads like a suicide note, because in part it was. O ye men who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly do you wrong me? You do not know the secret cause. There's something in that line that goes deeper than deafness. It's the cry of someone who is unwillingly becoming a cynic and a recluse. Someone who wants more than just to be admired, not just applauded. Beethoven had fans. He had patrons who paid handsomely for his music. He had audiences who wept at his performances. But being loved from a distance isn't the same as being seen up close. The closer anyone got, the more his deafness and the shame and rage that came with it pushed them away. Based on this letter, I think he was craving something deeper. He was craving to be known, for someone to share witness in his life. Beethoven was trapped behind the wall of his failing hearing, becoming unknowable. He said, "Such incidents almost brought me to despair. A little more and I would have ended my life." The note continues, dated several days later, with a change of heart. "It was only my art that held me back. It seemed impossible to leave the world until I had brought forth all that I felt was within me." Beethoven decided not to die. But here is the crucial part. He didn't decide to accept his deafness. He didn't decide to make peace with his situation. Instead, he decided to fight it. He decided that if he couldn't have control over his body, he would dominate the outside world. He would force the world to hear him, even if he couldn't hear the world. Act 2, The Iron Fist. He comes back from Heiligenstadt, and he changes the game. Historians call this his heroic period. He wrote the Eroica. He wrote the Fifth. And we play these pieces wrong, by the way. We play them slow and stately, but Beethoven's metronome markings are blitzing, so fast that many professional orchestras can't actually play them at the breakneck speeds that he intended. Played at his actual tempo, the Fifth Symphony doesn't sound like a victory lap. It sounds like a panic attack, the racing heartbeat of a man running for his life. Just listen. We look at this era and say, look at that resilience. But if you look at that man, you see something else. You see a man possessed. He turned his ferocity on the physical world. In the early 1800s, pianos were elegant, wooden instruments. Beethoven played with such physical force that he would snap the hammers. He would bust the strings. He would split the keys. And he petitioned manufacturers, build me a louder piano. He sawed the legs off of his piano so he could sit on the floor, so he could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. He was trying to bypass his ears and hear through his skeleton. If you look at his manuscripts from the time, they are a mess. We have this myth of the natural genius. Mozart's manuscripts are pristine. Beethoven's manuscripts look like a battlefield. There are holes in the paper where he scratched so hard he tore the page. There are angry scribbles, "No!" written at the margins. He would write out a melody, cross it out, write it again, cross it out 10 times, 20 times. He didn't have the divine download. He had the grind. He treated composition like an iterative process, and he brute forced his way to perfection. But this intensity had a cost. The more he achieved, the more he felt his past catching up with him. Even as he was one of the most celebrated composers in Europe, recognized during his time, by all accounts he had made it. Beethoven had been feeding a rumor for years. He let people believe that he wasn't actually the son of his drunk father, but the illegitimate son of the King of Prussia. He wanted to be royal, but also was quick to remind people that he was self-made. Think about the psychology there. He is the most famous man in Vienna, the man who told a prince there is only one Beethoven. And yet, deep down, he is still a boy in the cellar. I see the shame in his origins, that he would rather be the bastard son of a king than the legitimate son of his own father. What a way to escape your past. He undertook countless efforts to build a fortress of identity. The genius, the royal, the hero, to protect himself from the reality of who he really was and his real origins. Reality has a way of breaking in. Around 1820, he was out in the countryside. He was in a creative trance, walking, shouting to himself, waving his arms. He had lost track of time. It was dark, and he was lost. He was disheveled, wearing an old, tattered coat. He peered into the window of a house to ask for directions. Instead of finding his way home, the police arrived and arrested him. They thought he was a gypsy, homeless. And Beethoven started screaming, "I am Beethoven!" The police commissioner laughed. "Sure you are. And I'm the emperor." Think about that moment, locked in a cell, stripped of the tuxedo, the stage, the piano. Who is he? To the world, in that moment, he's just a crazy old man shouting a name. The King of Prussia fantasy did not save him here. It took the local music director showing up at the jail to identify him. That is Beethoven. The mayor had to apologize and drive him home in the state coach. He was winning the war on music, but he was losing the war on life. He was terribly lonely. He had no wife, no family. In 1824, 4 years after the jail incident, he premiered the Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy. The Ninth Symphony had been gestating for over 30 years. Beethoven first encountered Schiller's poem Ode to Joy as a young man in Bonn, and he had been trying to find a way to set it to music ever since. Sketching ideas, abandoning them, returning to them, never quite finding the form that could contain what he wanted to say. Now in his early 50s, deaf and sick and still searching for something he couldn't name, he finally found it. A symphony that builds through 3 purely instrumental movements, each one reaching towards something he can't quite grasp, before bursting into the 4th movement with human voices, and then launches into that simple, soaring melody that has become one of the most recognizable pieces of music in human history. Freude, schöner Götterfunken. Joy, beautiful, spark of divinity. This is the moment from the beginning of the episode, the world cheering for universal brotherhood. It proved to everyone, and himself, that he was still the emperor. But public success doesn't fix private brokenness. While the world was celebrating his message of love and unity, Beethoven had acquired a son. When his brother Caspar died, Caspar left behind his 9-year-old son named Karl. Beethoven saw an opportunity. He decided that since he couldn't fix his ears, couldn't fix his loneliness, he would fix this boy. It was a messy, ugly legal battle against Karl's mother. He called her the Queen of Night, and he spent a fortune on lawyers. And he won. He controlled Karl's schedule down to the minute. He decided what books he would read, what music he played, who he talked to. Beethoven hired servants to spy on the boy when he was away. Beethoven demanded perfection. He thought he was being a good father. He was trying to force-feed resilience to a child who had just lost his father and been stripped away from his mother. Beethoven poured all of his anxiety and his perfectionism and his fear of failure into this kid. He told Karl, "You are my son. You must be great." For years, the pressure built. Carl tried to pull away. Beethoven pulled tighter. In 1826, the boy broke. Carl bought 2 pistols. He climbed up to the ruins of an old tower outside Vienna and loaded the guns. He pointed one at his head, and he pulled the trigger. He missed. When Carl was asked, "Why did you do this?" Carl didn't blame his father for dying, and he didn't blame his mother for losing the legal battle. He said, "Because my uncle harassed me so." This is the failure point. Beethoven had spent his whole life believing that if you just push hard enough, if you have enough grit, you can conquer anything. He conquered the piano. He conquered the music market in Vienna and was incredibly celebrated. But when he tried to conquer a human relationship, he almost killed the only person left in his life. Act 3, The Open Hand. Carl survived that night outside of Vienna. He joined the army, moving away from Beethoven. Then there was a profound shift in the coming years. Picture this. A visitor arrives at Beethoven's apartment. Beethoven sits at a table, and when the visitor speaks, Beethoven instead slides a small notebook across to him. Write it down. The visitor scribbles his question. Beethoven reads it, and then answers aloud. He can't hear anything. This is how he interacts with other people, through ink and silence. The heroic energy was gone. He was tired. He was sick. He was completely, profoundly deaf, alone again. In the coming years, his music experienced a profound shift. He stopped writing for the public. He stopped trying to prove that he was the emperor. His deafness was a filter. It blocked out musical trends. He had no idea what was being played in the public square or being written by others anymore. It blocked out the critics. He barely interacted with anyone. It forced him on a journey inward, to a place where the music was pure abstract thought, and to explore a new corner of his art. In the final 2 years of his life, between 1825 and 1826, Beethoven composed 5 string quartets and a standalone piece called the Große Fuge, the Great Fugue, that are among the strangest and most beautiful works in all of classical music. Where the Ninth Symphony reaches outward, toward all humanity, the late quartets turn inward, toward something more private. They're dense and difficult and full of sudden shifts in mood and passages that seem to come out of nowhere and then dissolve into silence. This music doesn't try to impress the listener. It doesn't try to dominate you. It doesn't even finish its own sentences. It taps into a deeper truth. The critics, once again, had no idea what to do with this. They called the late quartets uncorrected horrors and incomprehensible, like the Chinese language. But when the string quartet in B-flat premiered with the Große Fuge as its finale, the audience demanded encores of just the middle movements, but sat in confused silence after the fugue. Beethoven's response when he found this out was, "And why didn't they encore the fugue? That alone should have been repeated. These people are cattle. Asses." It would take nearly a century for the world to catch up. Schubert, on his deathbed, asked to hear the Opus 131 quartet and afterwards said, "After this, what is there left to write?" But in 1826, Beethoven was alone with his vision, still composing music that he believed needed to exist even if no one else understood why. At this point, he had stopped looking for external validation. He wasn't writing for the ticket sales anymore. He was writing for the truth. In 1825, Beethoven fell deathly ill. He was bedridden for weeks. When he recovered, he wrote a movement in his quartet, Opus 132. He titled it the Heiligenstadt, Holy Song of Thanksgiving from a Convalescent to the Deity. Listen to this. Music opens with chords played without vibrato, stark and ancient sounding, like something from a medieval church. It builds slowly, almost unbearably slowly. Some kind of dance-like energy that Beethoven labeled feeling new strength, the body coming back to life. It doesn't sound like a struggle, the way that he was wrestling music into existence earlier in his career. It sounds like breathing. Not a song of triumph, a song of thanksgiving for mere survival. He wasn't conquering death. He was just grateful to be alive for one more day. His friend Karl Holz said that when Beethoven composed the slow movement of another late quartet, Opus 130, a piece called the Cavatina, he did it in tears of misery, and that merely thinking about it afterward always cost him a tear. The Cavatina has a section marked beklemmt, a German word meaning constricted or anguished, a tightness in the chest that won't release. In that passage, the melody becomes halting, like someone trying to speak through sobs, unable to get the words out. He had moved from resistance to acceptance, not resignation. He didn't quit, but he stopped fighting the reality of his condition and started to integrate it. Beethoven died March 26, 1827. He was 56. 20,000 people lined the streets for his funeral. Schools were closed. The military had to control the crowds. They were there to honor the great man. So what do we make of Ludwig van Beethoven? I keep coming back to him in the jail cell shouting, "I am Beethoven," at guards who only saw a disheveled man peering through windows. Being right wasn't enough. The music director had to show up and corroborate his story. Without that recognition, he's just another man yelling his name into the void. That's the particular curse of the life that chose Beethoven. He was an artist in an art form that at the time made independence impossible. A painter can lock himself in a room and create something complete. A writer only needs her pen and solitude. But a symphonic composer needs the village. Copyists, publishers, patrons, theater managers, government officials who grant permits, and then the entire orchestra of musicians to show up, rehearse, execute your vision. Beethoven despised the aristocracy, but needed their money. He thought most musicians were hacks, but he also needed them to bring his notes to life. He could barely tolerate human company, but his entire life's work required the cooperation of hundreds of people. And he lived in a state of constant friction. He moved 70 times when he lived in Vienna for 35 years. So every 6 months, he would leave his living arrangement and move on. And he left so many angry landlords behind him. He would leave the apartments in absolute filth. He was a menace around Vienna. From his childhood, he never fully healed. That's the part of the story that resists easy redemption. Beethoven wrote an ode to joy about humanity coming together, becoming brothers, and he also drove his own nephew to attempt suicide through relentless control and criticism. Some of his suffering got transformed into transcendent art that still moves people 2 centuries later. Some of it got passed on, the way that trauma can if we don't metabolize it. But for us, for the people doing hard things, people building, people grinding, the lesson here isn't his genius. We can't replicate that. I see the lesson here as a lesson of survival. He did so many things that he was so bad at. Terrible with numbers, terrible with organization, notoriously messy, awful with people, notoriously mean to those he was around. And yet he did it. Beethoven shows us what grit can do, and also what brute force cannot do. It can't fix the people you love. It cannot fix your body. It isn't a direct path to happiness. I like to think about how the real resilience wasn't in his heroic era. That was just brute force. Resilience came in the quiet work that he did in his final years. When the tools he spent his life working with broke, he didn't stop working. He changed the method, which also changed the result and created an entirely new era for his musical life. He stopped trying to conquer fate and started listening to the silence. He didn't defeat his deafness. He didn't fix his family. He didn't arrive at wisdom or peace. He died still difficult, still capable of harm, still raging against critics who didn't understand him. But in those final quartets, he found a way to speak the truth of his brokenness. You can hear it. It's not triumphant. It's not a conquest. It's just truth and deeply human. He took the broken instrument he was given and he played it until the end. I'm Christiane, and this is Gut Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Please join us on the next episode. Leave us a rating, a like on your platform of choice, and we'll see you next week.